We're now going to ask ourselves what kind of social animals are humans and how do they compare to other forms of social animals? It might seem odd to view humans as animals. We undoubtedly are animals. And trying to figure out what a human is well, that's controversial, isn't it? It's not an easy task. The domain of anthropology is a very important contributor to cognitive science, although it's more in the humanities than the sciences, precisely because we don't want to be going around telling other people how they appear to us as if we had some kind of authority there. So anthropology is a very broad field and it includes research on human cultures and languages throughout time and across the globe. Its origins were in studying people who appeared strange to Europeans, but hopefully the discipline has learned a lot since then. Paleoanthropologists look further back through time, looking at fossilized human remains, looking at archaeological evidence, trying to figure out in prehistorical times what way humans lived. One can go further back and try to understand us as primates, because the species border is somewhat arbitrary. And as you go back in time, we look more and more similar to other apes. So we'll be considering how we compare to our nearest ape neighbors as well. Anthropologists also make use of biology, studying genetic basis for variations among human populations. It's a very, very broad field. We're going to be considered here with comparative anthropology, I suppose. That is, how do we compare? What way should we think about social relations when we view humans as a particular kind of animal? Now, if you've ever tried to point something out to a dog, you've probably had the experience of pointing and then the dog sniffs your finger. Some dogs get pointing, but most dogs don't. Joint attention seems to be something that humans have have in spades. And we noted this in the cooperative eye hypothesis, and we noted that our nearest ape relatives have dark eyeballs. That doesn't mean that they're not interested in what other apes are looking at. In this respect, they are a bit like us. So chimpanzees will look in the direction that another chimp appears to be looking, but all they have to go on is the direction of the head, which is a much coarser signal than the direction of the eye. Now, how long is it since chimpanzees on one side and humans on the other side had a last common ancestor? And the answer to that is probably about 5 or 6 million years ago. The estimates vary. These things are a little bit unsure. That's the entire tree of life, drawn very much not to scale. And we're going to focus in there towards the top where we see there's one little branch with, it looks like a gorilla on one side and a human on the other. Let's have a look at it. And there we are. There's our little bit of the tree of life and our ape cousins. Now, the last common ancestor, 5 or 6 million years ago, that gave rise to a split, one branch of which gave rise to many kinds of hominids, one of which is Homo sapiens. And the other branch gave rise to not one but two large groups of primates. One is the bonobos and the other is the chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are better known than bonobos, but bonobos are just as important in many respects. They are much less studied. We know far less about bonobos than we do about chimpanzees, but these are the animals which are closest to us from a genetic point of view. Gorillas and orangutans are slightly further removed, and when you go past that, then you get to monkeys. And when you go further back, you get to primates. So humans are primates, which is a subgroup of mammals that includes lemurs and lorises and monkeys and apes and so on. It's the apes, though, that are our principal reference point. That's the chimpanzees, bonobos, gorillas, orangutans, and us. I think I misspelled orangutan, sorry. Please don't confuse monkeys and apes. There's very important differences. So first we're going to look at a few animal videos here. Here's one from National Geographic that illustrates what is increasingly clear, which is that chimpanzees have culture.
Although termite fishing is common among chimps, every group has its own tools and techniques. These are a part of their traditions. their cultures. Chimp culture? The term seems like an oxymoron. We like to think of culture as the pinnacles of human achievement, of art, history, and science. But in anthropological terms, culture is the transmission of group knowledge from one generation to another. Little Teva is doing her best to master one of the great arts of her culture, whether she knows it or not. It usually takes 4 or 5 years to master the technique, but today she has an early triumph. The idea of chimp culture, once radical, is now increasingly accepted among primatologists. Chimps around Africa use different techniques to smash nuts and fruits. Some use wooden hammers and anvils, some stones. And the Fungoli chimps slam baobab fruits against stones or trees. One of the most interesting and subtle things most chimps engage in is something called leaf clipping, biting off bits of leaves with a distinct popping sound to get each other's attention. But it means different things in different places. In some places, it's a come-on to the ladies. Here in Fungoli, it's a back off to other males. Or a part of an exciting development in their lives. Like a nice fruit tree.
Right now they're sort of advertising themselves, but also just excited because they're starting to eat again. I mean, chimps get excited about everything.
Here in Fungoli, leaf clipping among males leads inevitably to extravagant tantrums. Traditions passed down from adult to child. It's a flow of knowledge that once only we seemed capable of.
Right. Chimpanzee sociality is very different in many respects from human sociality, but there are some commonalities in this transgenerational passing on of skills, tools, techniques is one aspect. Now, when the social organization of animals first became the subject of scientific study, it was largely in the insect domain. And insect social lives are very different from primate social lives. Among insects, and we use the term eusocial animals, for a particular kind of organization in which social roles are fixed by and large. So we have different members of an ant colony have different roles. We've got workers, we've got warriors, we've got queens, there's lots of different roles, but you're born into your role, as it were. Now the differentiation in the roles is maintained over the course of your life through various means. But what's important is that you don't renegotiate your role. You're not in competition with others to move up the hierarchy. There's no promotion. Social roles are simply fixed. This is quite different from primates. We spend most of our time actually defending our roles. In fact, you're going to university. That's one way that you as a primate defend your role. That's one way that you try to better yourself. Ants do not better themselves. And it was thought that this form of social organization that we see in an ant colony or a termite colony was peculiar to insects and might have something to do with the form of their bodies. But we actually find eusocial organization in one kind of mammal as well, the naked mole rat. There's actually two kinds of naked mole rat. There's the Damaraland mole rat and the naked mole rat of Northeast Africa. But these are mammals, but they display an insect-like form of organization. They are very strange indeed. Here's another little video.
the naked mole rat, although it's neither a mole nor a rat. Much about their behavior is strange. They spend their entire lives in virtually complete darkness, weaving their way through an underground network of burrows and tunnels. Within their dark universe, they've evolved a rigid society that has more in common with ants or bees than with a typical mammalian social circle. At the top is a long, strong queen. She is the mother of all the other mole rats in the colony, which may total a few dozen or a few hundred. As long as she lives, she and a few chosen boy toys are the only ones that breed. The queen keeps the rest from mating by sheer intimidation. Their lives are all work and no foreplay. Some mole rats are drafted as soldiers to protect the colony from rival mole rats and predators. A quick sniff determines insider from outsider. Other mole rats tend to the young, clean burrows, dig tunnels, and look for food. Their giant incisors actually are outside their mouths, so the mole rats can shovel away without eating dirt. They dig in teams. The lead digger carves out the tunnel. Others pass the dirt back up the tunnel and out onto the surface. Going backwards or forwards is all the same. Though nearly blind, special hairs on their body help guide them and tell them where they're going. And even when traveling in the tunnels, each one's status in the hierarchy is clearly visible. The more senior members of the colony take the high road, while the juniors wriggle through underneath. The tunnels are only a few inches wide, but a full-fledged colony can stretch for half a mile. All this work is done to find their principal food, tubers scattered across the savanna. One of these giant roots can feed a colony for 2 to 3 weeks. And though they are born into a strict hierarchy, when it comes to food, everyone is equal.
Right. Now, the reason I show you that video is because I want to warn you against falling into the trap of biological determinism. That demonstrates that the form of social order that is available to a species is not simply dictated by the biological form of the individual. When we see the eusocial form of organization in insects, as varied as bees and ants, and we see it in the naked mole rat, we realize that the form of social organization is, to some extent, independent of the constitution of the individual body. And this is important because when the theory of evolution first was mooted, there was an awful lot of resistance to it because people didn't like to see humans as being related to apes. They thought they were guilty of biological determinism, thinking that, well, if our bodies are similar to those of chimpanzees, then that means we're going to be condemned to a form of social order like chimpanzees, and chimpanzees are quite violent. At the time, of course, while it was recognized that chimpanzees were remarkably like humans, the differentiation between chimpanzees and bonobos was not apparent. Recognizing that bonobos were a separate species is something that came much later. And when we now look at chimpanzees and bonobos and compare the two, what we find is that although we are equally closely related in a genetic sense to both kinds of ape, They have very different kinds of social organization. They differ quite strongly. So there's no sense in which humans are condemned to be like one or the other. It's true in humans and chimpanzees and bonobos and all primates that we spend our lives defining our social roles, defending our social roles, and improving our lot in life. But when we compare chimpanzees and bonobos, we see that they have very important differences between them. They both live in communities with open subgroups, but chimpanzees live in a patriarchy and bonobos are a matriarchy. That means that young males have to move out to found their own lineages if you're a chimp, but the young females have to move out if you're a bonobo. There's strong mother-child bonds in both kinds of ape, and grooming is a common pastime, but they differ hugely when it comes to sex. Both engage in promiscuous sex, but the chimpanzees do it in the context of reproduction. They do it when the female is fertile, and bonobos do it notoriously all the time, and in every possible variety. Absolutely scandalous. They settle their disputes this way. They have group sex, they have masturbation, they have homosexual sex, they have all kinds of sex. It plays a very important role, and it means that their lives in general are much less violent than those of chimpanzees. As a result, they've developed a reputation for being sort of hippie, free love chimpanzees, and this is not quite true, not really warranted. But what is important to note is that they are very different from chimpanzees, so that even though we're equally closely related to both, neither form of social organization should be taken as some kind of fate for humans. So if you have never seen bonobos, we'll wind up with a little, we'll have a look at a little bit of what makes bonobos bonobos and how different they are from chimpanzees.
Takayoshi Kano has led the research here in Wamba, Zaire for the past 22 years. He comes here in search of the second little-known species of chimpanzee. Sugarcane is a sweet lure used to call down the elusive bonobo. Dr. Kano and his associate Chia Hashimoto have discovered that bonobos are quite distinct from the chimps studied by Goodall and Bush. At first glance, they are different. Although they've been called pygmy chimps, they're not smaller, just more slightly built. Hunted elsewhere in Zaire, they're safe here, but wary still. The sugarcane buffet proves irresistible. At ease on 2 legs, as well as on 4, they simply rise up and walk, so their hands are free to carry the cane. Eerily, their long, shapely limbs and upright gait recall our own prehistoric forebears. And their natural 2-legged gait is only the first surprise they have in store for us. An impressively stirring female enters and snaps a young sapling. Once she picks herself up, she does something entirely surprising for a female chimp. She displays, and the males give her sway. For this is the confident stride of the group's leader, its alpha female, whom Kano has named Haru.
A very impressive alpha female. We're going to wind up this now just by looking at one other important aspect of primate sociality, which is the way in which we negotiate our disputes. It doesn't always end in violence. There's evidence for processes of reconciliation in about 25 different primate species. Reconciliation is really important. It's a means of smoothing over our disputes, handling our differences. And chimpanzees have even been known to appoint mediators. In the case of a conflict between 2 members of a troop, an older chimpanzee may intervene, may be required to sort things out and settle the dispute between them. So reconciliation is a very important part of how we found societies that are built on trust and in which our inevitable disagreements can be managed somehow without always resorting to violence. So those are just a few glimpses of some things we can learn as we look at social organization in other animals. And very importantly, we realize that by the biological form of the individual organism does not dictate the resulting form of social organization.